A war tax on Americans to pay for our war on ISIS. Well, one Democratic lawmaker preparing a bill to do exactly that. But some here say a war tax would amount to a declaration of war on our still struggling economy. Are they right? Hi, everybody. I'm David Assen. Welcome to Forbes on Fox. Let's go in focus with Steve Forbes, Rich Karlgaard, Elizabeth McDonald, Mike Ozanian, Rick Unger, and John Tamny. Steve, what do you think about this war tax?
Well, there was once a restaurant that had a slogan, "Too much is never enough." These political piggies in Washington are always finding an excuse to put more taxes on the American people. Defense spending as a proportion of our economy is not out of line, given our numbers since World War II. And in terms of the spending now, most of it is domestic spending. They just want another excuse to pick the pockets of the American people, which will hurt the economy, which will hurt our standard of living, and weaken our ability to fight these necessary conflicts and wars overseas.
Rick Unger, before we go further, I just want to say we understand the biggest cost of all in all of the conflicts that we've fought and that we are fighting are human lives. We've lost a lot of human lives, a lot of suffering, a lot of injured service people as well. But the costs are already stacking up. The costs escalate so quickly since mid-June, this war against ISIS. Between mid-June and August 29th, it's cost $562 million. That is a huge cost. This is the cost of the war on terror in general, but already the cost against ISIS is mounting up. How do we pay for it?
Well, first of all, David, I'm really pleased that you made the point you just made. It's all too easy to forget that we're talking about real people in these situations, so I'm glad you did it. Look. This is a tricky situation. Wars cost money. And if the nation agrees that this is a war that has to be fought, it's got to be paid for. I don't want to make the same mistakes we made back in the early 2000s when we went to war and spent money we didn't have. So there's two choices. You can cut the budget and use that money to spend on war. You can issue a war tax, which is what the congressman has offered. My suggestion would be it be a little of both so that every American, not just one half or the other, picks up and sacrifices for this effort.
By the way, Mac, there is a third option for raising revenue. You can sell bonds. We did that in World War II.
That's
if people really believe in, no, it's not a tax. It's a choice that individuals have whether or not they want to buy into this or not. Is that an option?
I'm against that, and I'm against the war tax. Here's why. I think we should need to get our allies to pony up. The U.S. has been going it alone for way too long. U.S. taxpayers have been footing the bill. Europe is historically spending less on their defense because they're spending more on public spending for, pensions and national health care. And that's not fair to the U.S. We did it in the Gulf War 1 and 2, David, where Germany, Japan, Saudi Arabia, and the Gulf states paid more into those wars. Mm-hmm. The allies need to step up. It is unfair that the U.S. taxpayer gets hit time and again for this.
John, what would a war tax do to the economy?
And that's the problem. It's a compelling idea at first glance because you want to make it difficult as possible to go to war and you want everyone to think hard about it. But it'd be a terrible idea because the last thing you want to do when you're committing troops to battle is to weaken your economy. It's something that would embolden the enemy, and at the same time it would reduce the amount of resources that we could commit to the battle. So it's an interesting idea, but it's a terrible path to go at this point, or really at any point.
By the way, Mike, the idea comes from Charlie Rangel. I'm not so sure he wants this war against ISIS. This may be kind of a poison pill that he's putting in there to sort of prevent a war. But what do you think about it?
I think that Congressman Rangel should look at what JFK did. JFK actually cut taxes during the early stages of the Vietnam War and did not raise them. The economy after the war came out in very good shape. So I don't think we need to raise taxes. I think the detriment to the economy, as others have pointed out, would be great. And in terms of the actual cost of fighting ISIS, it's likely to be much closer to something like the Vietnam War than, say, World War II, where there were massive tax increases. And the other thing to quickly point out is, since World War II, where we had that big tax increase, this country is much more heavily taxed and savings already much lower.
All right. Well, Rich, Mike brings up JFK. I want to bring up Ronald Reagan because, of course, he lowered tax rates tremendously during his term. He also increased defense spending tremendously. So you can do both, right? You can lower tax rates and increase defense spending.
Well, he did, David, and the asset value of the United States under Reagan's leadership, even though he added to the federal debt, went up far, far, far more than the addition of the federal debt. So it was a net win all around, and the Soviet Union collapsed. Look at national defense is the only mandatory thing that the federal government should do as described by the Constitution in Article 4, Section 4. Now, the key word is invasion. That's supposed to be the trigger. And as ISIS invaded us, well, they've certainly made their intentions clear. So I don't think we should wait around. Yeah. If you're going to put national government functions up for a separate tax, it should be the non-mandatory things like entitlements, not the one mandatory thing, national defense.
And Steve, I think Charlie Rangel does have it backwards. I mean, entirely backwards. Yes, we need a stronger defense. By the way, we have been spending less on defense over the past several years, but perhaps the way to get it is by strengthening our economy, and the way to do that is lowering tax rates, not raising them.
Oh, absolutely right. And then you have the resources to fight it. That's how we won the Cold War in the 1980s. The Soviet Union, their economy went down. Ours was getting stronger. We were far ahead in technology, thanks to the reforms that Reagan put in, unleashed that entrepreneurial drive. And the world saw we were going up. The Soviet Union was collapsing, and indeed it did. So strength begets more strength, and the best way to fight against dictators is having a strong entrepreneurial economy.
And Rick, I don't want to try to get too much in the head of these nuts, these terrorists who are fighting for ISIS, but the fact is that as the economy, as the world economy has slowed down a little bit, they have increased their membership. There may be a lot of disgruntled people that are going to them because they're so down in their luck. Maybe the thing to do to fight ISIS, in part, is strengthen our economy, not weaken it by a tax hike.
Well, maybe. I mean, that's something you can speculate about. I fear it might be a bit of a stretch. But look, it's interesting, some of the things that I've heard. David, you had suggested bonds. That was actually my first thought. Why don't we go back to the days of war
World
bonds?
War II war bonds.
The problem is it's actually a loan, and you'd be increasing national debt. Also got to respond to Mike. When JFK was still with us, the Vietnam War had yet to really have an impact on our economy. Those days would come.
Yeah, but listen, JFK had high taxes to pay for World War II. That's what JFK was contending with. Let's be real. Let's be real. We have NATO where majority of the members are spending less than 2% of their GDP on defense. That's not fair. European partners here are getting to retire. The workers are getting to retire early and work less than the U.S. taxpayer. We've got to stop having the U.S. taxpayer hit up time and again to pay for wars, unfinanced wars. I get it. The other thing we could talk about too, David, you make a good point about growing the economy worldwide that would push back on terrorism. Why not a trade war instead, where you drop the barriers to trade and have really powerful alliances that could stop future conflicts as well and push aside. Once we vanquish ISIS, it could bring peace, better path to
John
peace.
Tamny, what about the idea, though, of sharing sacrifice? Charlie Rangel's been talking about that for a long time, and frankly, some of that is compelling, that the sacrifice is not shared equally in the country. Should it be?
Well, I like it in the sense of what Elizabeth says, and that we should have some of our allies fund part of this. But I think one point that's really got to be made is a bond is a tax. A dollar is a dollar no matter where you take it from. So if we're going to do this, and I think it would probably be ill-advised, let's cut spending elsewhere, as Rich says. At least we can say national defense is a constitutional purpose of the government. Cut spending elsewhere. Don't raise bonds and weaken the economy that way. It's every bit as much of a tax as raising taxes.
The fact is that a tax is compulsory. A bond is something that people choose to buy or not, correct?
Well, if you have a low tax rate regime and a sensible monetary policy, then you have a stronger economy, and you can indeed take on more debt, as we've seen throughout history. A strong economy, you can take on more debt for the things that you need to do. And by the way, on U.S. weakness, in the 1930s and 1970s, when we were seen as a weak nation, bad forces rose up. So a strengthened economy has that intangible, very real asset in the world. When people see strength, they respond to it.
Best way to prevent war is to have a strong defense. Thank you very much, folks.